Stars and Stampers, this is Nancy with your Tuesday tutorial on how to do an iris folding card. I'm glad you stopped by. For more information, you'll need to come to the Stars and Stamps blog for Operation Right Home to pick up your template and a few more photos and instructions on how to do this technique. As far as I can tell, iris folding is a technique that originated in Holland or in Europe, and it was done originally with pieces of scrap paper or tissue, and this was done just to make some interesting layers. It's kind of a form of origami, and if you do a web search for iris folding, you'll find lots of really cool patterns and techniques. I wanted to make our own for the forum, for the blog here at Stars and Stamps, and so I came up with this template. You can print this template out from the Stars and Stamps blog on the post about this tutorial. I printed mine on some heavy cardstock because I plan on using it again, and if I'd thought first, I probably would have even slipped it into an 8.5 by 11 page protector to keep it safe for future use, because you can use it inside the protector too. I'm going to work upside down so you guys can see what I'm doing today. The parts that you'll need to complete this card are some strips of scrap paper. I cut these to 1/4 inch. You will need some adhesive or some tape. You can use your huge ATG gun if you want, whatever you prefer. The next thing that you'll need is a window cut into a piece of cardstock. Now I have a Cricut, and on my Cricut I'm always cutting out shapes, and then I'm left with this negative image behind, which I never really thought to use for anything. I probably threw away a ton of these without knowing that they can be used for something fun. You don't have to have a Cricut. You can use a punch, you can use a die cut or a spellbinder, or you can cut it freehand with an X-Acto blade, whatever you want, to get a shape cut out of paper that's the size that you're going to use on a card. This piece is about 3¼ inches by 3¼ inches, and then I simply cut a mat that was 3.5. This is going to go behind when we're all done. After you have your template printed out, you're going to take your shape that you choose, and you don't have to have a star. You can use a circle or an oval or a shape of any kind that you want, and that's what makes this card really fun. Go ahead and choose which design you want to work with. This one will use 3 different papers. This one uses 4, and there's one for 5 even if you want to get really crazy with it. The next thing that you'll do is take your piece of cardstock with the shape cut into it. Place it face down on whichever pattern you want to use. Once you have that centered and decided which one it is that you want to use for this card, just use a couple pieces of tape. We're going to tape this piece of cardstock to the pattern. You don't want to use tape that's super sticky for this because you don't want it to stick too hard and rip off later on. So put your piece of tape on your clothes or your sleeve for a second, get it unsticky just a little bit before you put it down on your paper. For this pattern, I'm going to be using 3 different strips, so I'm going to go ahead and pick those out now. Through trial and error, I kind of discovered that the best way to go about this is to just use some tape. You're going to start at the outside and work your way in. And you can just kind of rip off the scrap strips as you go. Line your strip of paper up with the black line that's on the pattern. Always work in a circular pattern, meaning you want to go around this way. You don't want to skip and do one here and one here, or else the pattern is just not complete. It doesn't matter if you do your strips of paper, all your red ones first, or if you want to alternate red, white, blue, if that makes sense to you. Doesn't really matter. You can go at this in any pattern that you choose. And at first I really kind of worried about there being too much tape on the back and making this too thick, but I discovered that that really doesn't happen. It's fine to use as much tape as you want. The back of this doesn't have to be very neat. Nobody's gonna see the back part, and it doesn't really matter if your edges are ripped and your tape's kind of all over the place. That is okay. You can see here that I've completed a couple of rows. I did 3 each of the red, and now I'm going to follow with a different strip of paper. When you're using a patterned paper for your strips, it's better to try to stick with a pattern that has a smaller pattern, something with really small checkers or dots or some really small flowers. Whatever your pattern is, it should be tiny instead of the larger pattern papers. It will just make your finished design look a lot better. Always remember that the pattern that you're using is going to be the one that's facing down. For instance, this one, I'm not using this pink side so much as I'm wanting this blue side to show. Just keep piling on the tape and don't worry about it getting too thick. Okay, I'm ready to start using my third pattern paper. Just keep going in the same fashion until you reach the inside of the pattern. Did you know that anytime you're working with a pattern or an image that's in a spiral fashion, that's supposed to be relaxing and healing and good for you? So I guess this is like a therapeutic card. When you get that last little strip tape down, you're going to see that there's a little hole, and that happens on all the patterns. Now you can either cover that up if you want to, or you can just leave it blank so that it shows through to your bottom layer. For the last step of this, I'm just going to take my scissors and make sure that none of my little strips are hanging over the edge of my paper, my base. Like there's a couple stragglers that I want to get rid of. When you've got all your strips cut off so they're not hanging over the edges, apply just a little square of some dimensional squares or some foam tape or whatever it is you use to pop stuff off with. I know Sandy calls it the precious. Just stick it in the corners because the corners are going to be lower, not as thick as this part where you taped all the strips down. After you've got your dimensionals in your corners, go ahead and flip it over. And maybe you want to add it to just a little frame. and that keeps the base of the card flush pretty much with all the stuff that's underneath of it. It'll keep it popped up just a little bit, but it's even all the way around. There is the finished result of your iris folding. All that's left is to attach this to a card. And you have a really cool looking embellishment, focal point on your card. I love this. This is a lot of fun. I wanted to demonstrate just another idea of something that you can do with your iris folding. And so once again, I used my Cricut to cut out this little Christmas ornament. I'm using the negative space that's left behind, and I did run this through a Cuttlebug folder to give it a little bit of some embossing, some dry embossing on that. Just gives it a little bit of pattern and something interesting. Again, you're going to just put this face down on the pattern that you choose. Tape it lightly so it doesn't go anywhere while you're working. And pick out some strips of paper that you want to use. Again, using very small patterns. If your pattern paper is patterned. For this card, instead of doing red all the way around and then the white and then the blue all the way around, I'm going to keep each of these different patterns to their own little vortex shape that's shown here. Always remember to put the pattern of the paper that you're working with face down. I've done that wrong before. You can see as I'm working here that I'm using all the green, all of one pattern paper, and then all the red, and then another pattern paper. And this gives it a different look than how this one turned out. Another fun thing that I learned as I was figuring out how to do these cards, I was doing some searching on the internet, and I found out that rather than strips of paper, regular pattern paper or cardstock, you could use tissue paper. You could use some vellum. I also saw some really pretty cards that were done with different strips of like a metallic looking paper. I saw a couple that were done with different kinds of tissue paper that turned out really pretty. And I even saw some where somebody had used pieces of their wrapping paper. I even saw a couple of cards where people had used some pieces of leftover ribbon instead of paper for their strips, and those were really beautiful. The iris folding is called iris fold, I found out, because the final look of it resembles the inside part of your eye, or maybe the aperture part of a camera, where it spirals in and out to get smaller and larger. When you're done, go ahead and adhere it to a card base and maybe give it just a couple little pieces of embellishment. And that is our cards for the tutorial. I will go ahead and post some photos of our finished cards on the blog along with the templates, so don't forget to snag those and give it a try. Try it out for yourself. I can't wait to see what kind of different patterns and shapes you guys come up with to try for yourself and share with us. I think that these will make some really fantastic any hero cards, which we do need a lot of right now. So thanks for your help, and thanks for watching today's Tuesday tutorial.